The air in the orchard tasted of autumn. A crisp, wine-like scent of ripe apples, damp earth, and turning leaves filled Ethan's lungs. He stood between two rows of gnarled, heavy-laden trees, a half-full bushel basket at his feet. With a practiced, gentle twist, he plucked a Kingston Black from its branch. The apple was a deep, moody crimson, almost black in the soft afternoon light. He ran a thumb over its smooth, cool skin. Perfect. This 10-acre orchard, a rolling piece of land inherited from his grandfather, was Ethan's sanctuary and his life's work. When he had taken it over a decade ago, it was a neglected plot of standard, bland, red delicious trees. Now it was a thriving, diverse ecosystem of heirloom cider apple varieties, names that sounded like poetry: Kingston Black, Dabinet, Yarlington Mill. He wasn't just a farmer, he was a curator, a scientist, and an artist. His passion was in the slow, patient craft of turning this fruit into the crisp, complex, artisanal ciders that were making his small cidery, Orchard End, a respected name among local chefs and connoisseurs. "That's the last of the West Block picked, Ethan," called out a voice from the end of the row. It was Mr. Harris, his elderly neighbor, who came over to help every harvest season, more for the company than the meager pay Ethan could afford. "Looks like a good yield this year," Ethan called back, his voice full of a quiet, deep satisfaction. This was real. This was tangible. The weight of the apple in his hand was a satisfying counterpoint to the vague, flashy world his family celebrated. His phone, resting on a fence post, began to buzz. The ringtone was a frantic, jarring tune he'd assigned to his mother, a sound that always signaled an impending drama. He ignored it. It buzzed again, then a third time, each vibration a small, insistent crack in the peace of his afternoon. With a sigh, he wiped his hands on his jeans and picked it up. "Hi, Mom." "Ethan, oh, thank God." His mother's voice was a familiar, high-strung cascade of anxiety. "You have to come home, right now. It's an urgent family matter." Ethan's shoulders slumped. A family matter was a euphemism for a crisis of his brother's making. "Mom, I'm in the middle of the harvest. Can it wait until tonight?" "No, it cannot wait," she insisted, her voice rising. "Your brother is here. He's very upset. We all are. Just get in your truck and come home. Your family needs you." Your family needs you. The phrase was a well-worn tool, used to pry him away from his own life and pull him back into their chaotic orbit whenever the need arose. He looked at the half-picked row of trees, the sun beginning to dip towards the horizon. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice flat with a resignation he knew all too well. The silent burden of being the responsible one was, as always, a summons he was not allowed to refuse. His parents' home was a pristine suburban box, a place of manicured lawns and a palpable, unspoken tension. He walked in to find them in the living room, a space that felt more like a furniture showroom than a place where people actually lived. His mother was hovering nervously by the fireplace. His father sat in his armchair, staring into the middle distance. And his younger brother, Leo, was pacing back and forth, a storm of agitated energy. Leo was dressed in a sharp, tailored shirt that was trying too hard, a stark contrast to Ethan's simple, earth-stained work clothes. He was a low-level analyst at a faceless investment firm, but he carried himself with the swagger of a Wall Street titan. "And the alpha on that crypto trade was insane," Leo was saying, gesturing with his phone. "We're talking high risk, high reward, Dad. You have to be bold to win in this market." "He has such a sharp financial mind," his mother said, looking at Leo with a blind adoration that always made Ethan's stomach clench. "So ambitious. We're so proud of the bold moves you're making, sweetie." "That's the future," his father added, nodding with a gravitas he hadn't earned. He turned to Ethan, his gaze lukewarm. "How's the hobby farm, son? Still playing with those apples?" "The orchard is doing well, Dad," Ethan said evenly. "We're having a great harvest. Chloe from the Gilded Spoon just doubled her cider order for the season. Oh, that's nice, his mother said, her interest already fading. It's good you have something to keep you busy. This was the familiar script of every family gathering. Leo's reckless gambling on the stock market was bold moves. Ethan's profitable, respected, and painstakingly built business was a hobby farm. Leo, the golden child, was praised for his vision, a vision that had so far produced nothing but a string of debts and near misses. Ethan, the quiet, steady one, was dismissed as a simple farmer, a man who lacked the guts for the real world. As the evening wore on, Leo's confident facade began to crack. The pacing became more frantic, the bravado in his voice thinning to a reedy, nervous whine. He finally sank onto the sofa and put his head in his hands. "What is it, Leo?" his mother asked, her own anxiety immediately spiking. "What's wrong?" The story came tumbling out, a confession of breathtaking recklessness and stupidity. He hadn't been making bold moves. He'd been day trading with money he didn't have, using a shady, high-leverage online platform. He'd chased a bad crypto investment, doubling down again and again, until the market had turned and wiped him out completely. "How much, Leo?" his father asked, his voice a low, fearful whisper. Leo looked up, his handsome, charismatic face crumpled in a mask of pure terror. 25,000, he choked out. "And the lender, it's not a bank, Dad. They're based offshore. They've been calling me, and the interest is piling up every day. They said they know where you live." $25,000. The number, a solid, life-altering sum, hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. His mother let out a small, strangled gasp. His father's face went pale. This was the crisis. The inevitable, predictable implosion of his brother's brilliant financial mind. But this time, he hadn't just lost his own money, he had invited a tangible threat to their doorstep. And then, as if choreographed, 3 pairs of eyes turned to Ethan. They looked at him not as a son or a brother caught in a shared moment of family panic. They looked at him as a solution. He was the one with the business. He was the one who was good with money. He was the responsible one. He was their only way out. His mother was the first to move. She crossed the room and sank to her knees in front of the chair where he sat, her hands gripping his. Her face, a mask of performative grief just moments before, was now a portrait of raw, genuine terror. "Ethan," she wept, her voice a ragged, desperate plea. "You are his older brother. You are the responsible one. You have savings. You must help him." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears, her words a heavy, unbreakable chain. "You must save him. You must save us." The hours after Ethan left his parents' house were a long, sleepless torment. He sat alone in the quiet of his small farmhouse, the rhythmic chirping of crickets outside, a mocking counterpoint to the chaotic storm raging in his mind. The air, usually so clean and fragrant with the scent of apples and wood smoke, felt thick and suffocating. On the simple wooden table before him, bathed in the yellow glow of a single lamp, lay the catalog for the pressing and bottling line he had spent 5 years saving for. It wasn't just a piece of machinery, it was the next chapter of his life. He ran a finger over the glossy page, over the gleaming stainless steel press that could triple his output, over the automated bottler that would free him from a week of grueling manual labor with every batch. It represented his future, his ambition, his independence. $25,000, the exact amount needed to place the order, the exact amount his brother had lost, the exact amount his family now expected him to sacrifice. His dream was a tangible thing, a structure of steel and glass, of ambition and hard work. His duty was a ghost, an intangible but immensely powerful force, woven from a lifetime of cultural expectation and familial conditioning. He was the older brother, the responsible one. It was his role, his burden, his identity. To refuse would be to abdicate the very essence of who they had always told him he was. He paced the small room, the catalog a silent, tormenting witness to his inner conflict. He felt a deep, burning resentment. Why was his slow, patient, and successful work always the resource to be plundered to pay for his brother's reckless, flashy failures? Leo chased shortcuts to wealth, and when he inevitably stumbled, it was Ethan's long, steady path that was expected to be torn up to pave over his brother's mistakes. The emotional siege began just after midnight. His mother's first call was a storm of tears and panicked accusations. "Ethan, how can you even think about this?" she wept into the phone. "These people could show up at our door. Think of your father's heart. Your brother is just a boy. He was foolish. Are you really going to let your family be ruined over money? Over some new piece of farm equipment?" An hour later, his father called. His approach was different, a quiet, heavy application of guilt. "Ethan, a man takes care of his family. It's that simple. Your mother is beside herself. You know what the right thing to do is." They called again and again, a relentless, coordinated assault on his resolve. They painted a horrifying picture of what would happen if he refused, a future of threats, public shame, and a shattered family for which he alone would be responsible. They never once mentioned his dream, his savings, his future. Those things were irrelevant, unspoken luxuries in the face of their immediate, self-inflicted crisis. By the time the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the trees of his orchard, he was exhausted, emotionally battered, and utterly defeated. The relentless waves of guilt and fear had eroded his defenses. He looked at the catalog on his table, at the beautiful, impossible dream, and with a sense of profound, soul-crushing loss, he closed it. He had made his decision. He arrived at the family home later that morning. The atmosphere was thick with a funereal tension. His parents and Leo were in the living room, their faces pale and drawn. They looked up as he entered, their eyes filled with a desperate, fearful hope. Ethan didn't waste time with pleasantries. He stood in the middle of the room, his back straight, his expression grim. "I'll give you the money," he said. The reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. His mother let out a loud, theatrical sob of pure relief, rushing forward to clutch his hands. "Oh, Ethan, my son, I knew you wouldn't let us down. I knew you would save us." She held his hands for a moment, her eyes shining with tears, and then she immediately turned away, pulling out her phone, her fingers already flying across the screen, no doubt to inform someone that the debt would be paid. His father came over and clapped him firmly on the shoulder. "That's a good son," he said, his voice thick with approval. It was not the voice of a man expressing gratitude for a monumental sacrifice. It was the voice of a patriarch, pleased that his eldest son had complied with his duty. Leo, who had been huddled in a corner, looked up. He didn't meet Ethan's eyes. He stared at a point on the floor and muttered a quiet, almost inaudible, "Thanks, man." His expression was not one of remorse or gratitude. It was the simple, selfish relief of a condemned man who had just received a pardon. And that was it. That was the last draw. Ethan stood in the center of their collective, frantic relief and felt a profound, arctic chill. They hadn't seen him at all. They hadn't seen his 5 years of hard work, his carefully saved dream, the immense personal cost of this moment. They had only seen a solution to their problem, a walking, talking bank account that had finally been unlocked. He was not a savior. He was a utility, and the transaction, in their minds, was complete. Feeling a deep, gut-wrenching unease, a sense that he had just made a terrible, irreversible mistake, Ethan left his family's home and drove his truck not back to his own property, but to the farm adjacent to it. Mr. Harris was on his porch, methodically sharpening a pair of pruning shears. the rhythmic scrape of stone on steel, a comforting, steady sound. Ethan sat with him, and without revealing that he had already made his promise, he laid out the situation. He spoke of his brother's debt, his parents' fear, and the immense pressure on him to sacrifice his own savings. Mr. Harris listened patiently, his weathered face impassive. When Ethan was finished, the old man was silent for a long time, continuing the slow, steady work of sharpening his shears. "Family is a heart matter, son," he said finally, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "But $25,000 is a business matter. A promise made in a panic is just hot air. To survive a storm, you need a post in the ground to tie your boat to." "What do you mean, Mr. Harris?" "I mean," the old man said, his eyes sharp and clear, "that love and duty are one thing, but a debt is another. You need to have it on paper. It's not about not trusting them, it's about clarity. It protects everyone, especially you." He explained the concept of a promissory note, a simple legal document that turned a vague promise into a formal agreement. A debt secured not by his reckless younger brother, but by his parents, and by the only real asset they had, the family home. Ethan returned to his family's house that evening. He carried with him not just the weight of his sacrificed dream, but a single folded document, freshly drawn up by a local notary. "There is one condition," he said, his voice steady, interrupting his mother's cheerful discussion of how this whole ordeal was now behind them. They all turned to look at him, their expressions of relief faltering into confusion. He placed the document on the table. He used the logic Mr. Harris had helped him devise. "This is a formality," he said calmly. "It's to protect the family. The money is coming from my business savings. If this lender ever tries to claim Leo was a business partner or that this money is somehow tied to the orchard, this document proves it was a personal loan from me to you to pay a private debt. It legally separates my business from Leo's troubles. It protects all of us." It was a brilliant justification, an argument based on protecting them. It was a language they could understand. His parents, distracted by their relief and desperate to put the entire ugly affair behind them, barely glanced at the document. Of course, whatever you think is best, son," his father said, taking the pen and scribbling his signature with a dismissive wave. His mother signed it while giving Leo instructions on what to tell the creditor. It was just a piece of paper, a minor bureaucratic hurdle in their great escape from consequence. Ethan took the document, now bearing the signatures of his parents and a witness, and folded it carefully. He walked out of the house, the paper a heavy, cold weight in his pocket. He had saved his family. He had sacrificed his future. And in return, he had armed himself with a tense and powerful secret, a legal line drawn in the dust between him and them. The Brotherhood, for now, was intact, but the price of his own protection was a hidden legal threat, a silent burden that felt heavier than the $25,000 he was about to lose. The months that followed the transfer of funds were a long, quiet exercise in self-delusion. Ethan told himself that his sacrifice had been a necessary evil, a painful but noble act to protect his family. He threw himself into his work, the familiar, back-breaking labor of the orchard, a welcome distraction from the hollow ache where his dream used to be. He pruned the apple trees with a savage intensity, hauled crates of fruit until his muscles screamed, and spent his nights trying to figure out how he could possibly manage the upcoming bottling season with his old, inefficient equipment. The $25,000 was a ghost that haunted his every financial decision. It was the new tractor tire he couldn't afford, the part-time help he couldn't hire, the constant, grinding stress of operating on a razor-thin margin. From his family, there was only a profound and unnerving silence on the matter. The few times he saw them, the conversation was all breezy, superficial chatter. They spoke of the weather, of a neighbor's new fence, of Leo's brilliant new ideas for disrupting the market. The massive, life-altering sacrifice he had made for them had been completely, surgically removed from the family history. It was as if it had never happened. He was the silent, burdened one, and they were the masters of a comfortable, convenient amnesia. The fragmentation began on a crisp Saturday in late autumn. Ethan was in town making a cider delivery to Chloe's restaurant, the Gilded Spoon. He was maneuvering his old, slightly rusted pickup truck into a parking space when a low, guttural roar made him look up. A sports car, a machine so sleek, black, and aggressively expensive it looked like it had landed from another planet, snarled down the small town's quiet main street. It pulled into a space directly in front of the town's most expensive bistro. The driver's side door opened, and his brother, Leo, unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He was wearing a pair of designer sunglasses and a smug, self-satisfied grin. The sight was a physical blow. It was a visceral, public flaunting of the life Leo was living versus the one Ethan was enduring. Ethan, in his mud-caked boots and worn flannel shirt, felt a hot, unfamiliar surge of pure, unadulterated rage. His sacrifice dream, his new bottling line, his entire future, it had been reincarnated as this ridiculous, phallic monument to his brother's irresponsibility. He got out of his truck and walked across the street, his footsteps heavy. Leo. His brother turned, his grin faltering for a split second when he saw the look on Ethan's face. "Hey, bro," he said, recovering his swagger. "What's up? Checking out the new ride?" "Where did you get the money for this, Leo?" Ethan asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Leo laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Made a couple of smart trades. The market's volatile. You gotta know when to get in and get out. I'm back in the game, Ethan. You should be happy for me." "Happy for you?" Ethan's voice was tight. "I gave up my entire savings so you wouldn't have your legs broken by a loan shark, and you used it to buy a car?" "Whoa, hold on," Leo said, putting up his hands. "That money was a family thing. That's over. This," he said, patting the hood of the car, "is my fresh start. You can't expect me to stay down forever, can you?" There was no remorse, no guilt, no acknowledgement of the debt, moral or otherwise. Just the same breathtaking, golden child entitlement he had displayed his entire life. Ethan drove to his parents' house in a cold fury. He walked in without knocking. They were in the living room, watching television. "He bought a sports car," Ethan said, his voice shaking with a rage he could no longer contain. "He's driving it around town like a king, and you haven't paid me back a single dollar." His parents looked up, their expressions not of shame, but of annoyance at being confronted. "Ethan, for heaven's sake, keep your voice down," his mother said, a look of pained exasperation on her face. "Your brother is finally getting his confidence back. He needs to look successful to be successful. You, of all people, should understand that." "I understand that he's spending my future on a new toy," Ethan shot back. "It wasn't a toy. It was a family crisis," his father said, his voice firm with a self-righteous authority. "We dealt with it. It's time to move on." "Move on?" Ethan asked, his voice incredulous. "What about the loan? What about paying me back?" His mother stood up, her face a mask of wounded indignation. "How can you be so petty?" she asked, her voice rising. "After all we've been through, your brother is starting a new venture. He needs every penny he has to get back on his feet. You can't expect us to pay you back now. Are you trying to ruin your own brother over money?" There it was, the final, brutal, and explicit betrayal. They had no intention of ever repaying him. They didn't see it as a loan to be honored. They saw it as a tax, a duty he had paid for the privilege of being the responsible son. The brotherhood he had sacrificed his dream to protect had been a lie all along. It was a one-way street of obligation, and he had just reached the dead end. The fragmentation was complete. Later that night, Ethan sat at the small, worn bar of the Gilded Spoon, staring into a glass of his own cider. The golden, bubbly liquid, usually a source of such pride, seemed to mock him. Chloe was wiping down the counter, her expression one of deep concern. He told her everything. The promise of the loan, the sacrifice of his dream, the new sports car, and the final brutal conversation at his parents' house. "It's gone, Chloe," he said, his voice a hollow whisper. "The money, my future, my family. It was all a lie." Chloe stopped wiping the bar. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective loyalty that he had not seen from his own family in years. "A lie? Ethan, you are the most honest, hard-working person I know. You saved them, and they're spitting in your face." She paused, her gaze sharpening. "Wait a minute. You were so worried back then, after it happened. Did you do what we talked about? Did you get anything in writing?" Her words were a spark in the desolate, empty darkness of his mind. The visit to Mr. Harris, the old man's quiet, practical wisdom, the trip to the notary, the document, the heavy, official-feeling paper he had locked away in the bottom drawer of his desk, the promissory note. A new, strange energy began to course through him. The despair, so absolute just moments before, began to recede, burned away by the heat of a memory he had tried to forget. He hadn't been a complete fool. In his moment of greatest weakness, he had listened to a wise old man and had forged for himself a small, secret shield. He looked up at Chloe, and the defeated, heartbroken look in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a new, cold, and dangerous light. "Yes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I did." He stood up from the bar, the hollow ache in his chest now filling with something else, a cold, quiet, and unshakable anger. He was no longer the dutiful son, the sacrificial brother. He had been a creditor all along. He walked out of the restaurant and into the cool night air. His shoulders were straight, his stride was purposeful. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a raw, open wound, but now it was being forged into something else, something hard and sharp and strong. He was on his way home to unlock the drawer that held the key to either his family's accountability or their ruin. The winter that followed was a season of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. The fiery rage Ethan had felt after the final confrontation at his parents' house did not burn out. Instead, it cooled and hardened into a core of pure, unshakable resolve. The emotional ties to his family, frayed for years, had finally been severed. He was no longer a son and a brother waiting for a repayment that would never come. He was a businessman who had made a bad loan, and he was now in the process of rectifying that mistake. He did not call them. He did not engage. He poured his energy, his anger, and his profound sense of betrayal into the one thing that had never let him down, his work. The orchard, dormant and sleeping under a blanket of snow, became his silent confidant. He spent the cold months in his cidery not just maintaining his old, struggling equipment, but innovating. He experimented with new yeast strains and fermentation techniques, creating small experimental batches of cider that were more complex and nuanced than anything he had ever made before. It was a kind of therapy, a way of creating something beautiful and true out of a season of bitterness and loss. He also began, for the first time in years, to rebuild his life outside the orchard. He reconnected with his chosen family. He had weekly dinners with Chloe at her restaurant, their conversation a comfortable mix of business and friendship. He spent time with Mr. Harris, absorbing the old man's quiet, practical wisdom, a welcome antidote to the chaotic, emotional logic of his own family. He started attending the local Growers Association meetings again, re-engaging with a community of peers who respected his skill and valued his contribution. He was slowly, methodically building a fortress of support around himself. The promissory note, the legally binding document he had retrieved from his desk, sat in a safe deposit box at the local bank. It was a silent, powerful presence in his life, a trump card he was not yet ready to play. He was giving them a chance, a long, silent season, to do the right thing. They did not. The few phone calls he received from his mother were masterpieces of willful ignorance, filled with breezy chatter about her garden club and complaints about his father's snoring. The $25,000, the sports car, the broken Brotherhood, it was all an unspoken, forbidden topic. They had moved on. They expected him to do the same. As the first buds of spring began to appear on the apple trees, Ethan knew it was time. He could not build a new future for his business while the unresolved debt of his past was holding him back. He met with a local lawyer, a practical, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, whom Chloe had recommended. He laid the whole story out on her desk: the family dynamic, the debt, the sacrifice, and finally, the signed and notarized promissory note. Sarah read the document carefully, her expression grim. "This is ironclad, Ethan," she said, looking up at him. "It's a formal loan secured by their property. They signed it. They owe you the money." She leaned forward. "So, what do you want to do?" "I want what I'm owed," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "I want my dream back." "Okay then," she said, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "The first step is a formal letter of demand. We will officially notify them that the loan is in default and give them 30 days to contact this office and establish a repayment plan. It's a warning shot. Let's see how they react." The family's reaction was as swift as it was explosive. The letter, a cold, legal document that could not be ignored or emotionally manipulated, shattered their comfortable amnesia. His mother was the first to call, her voice a torrent of tears and wounded accusations. "Ethan, how could you do this?" she wailed. "A lawyer! You're sending a lawyer after your own mother and father? You're threatening to take our home after everything we've done for you. You are breaking my heart. Do you hear me? You are breaking it." The old Ethan would have been gutted by her tears, his resolve dissolving under the heat of her guilt. But the new Ethan, the man who had spent a long, cold winter forging a new spine, was unmoved. "This is a legal matter now, Mom," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Please direct all future communication to my lawyer." He hung up the phone, his heart pounding, but his hand perfectly still. He then blocked her number. It was a small, digital act, but it felt like a wall being raised, a boundary being firmly and finally set. His father's texts began a few hours later, a barrage of short, sharp attacks on his honor. "You have brought disgrace and shame on this family. Your brother is trying to rebuild his life, and you do this to him. This is not how a son behaves. We are deeply disappointed." Ethan read each one, a familiar, dull ache in his chest. He screenshotted the entire conversation, forwarded it to Sarah with the subject line, "For your records," and then blocked his father's number. Leo's response came that evening, a furious, threatening voicemail that was a world away from his usual slick charm. "You think you're so tough, hiding behind your little small-town lawyer," he snarled. "You think you can come after our parents, after me? You will regret this, Ethan. I swear to God, you will regret this." Ethan saved the message, emailed the audio file to Sarah, and then blocked his brother's number. The threats, the tears, the guilt, it was all just noise now. He was done listening. The 30-day period passed in a state of tense radio silence. Ethan continued his work, the rhythm of the orchard a soothing counterpoint to the distant war he had initiated. He was in the cidery, testing the pH of a new experimental batch of Perry, a symbol of his determination to move forward, when his phone rang. It was Sarah. "Well, we have their official response," she said, her voice grim. "Or rather, their lack of one. The deadline was yesterday. They haven't made contact." She paused. "But I did get a call this morning from a lawyer they've retained, a real shark from the city." Ethan felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. And? And, Sarah said, her voice laced with a lawyer's weary disdain, their official position is that the promissory note was signed under extreme emotional duress and is therefore invalid. They are formally refusing to pay. They are calling your bluff, Ethan. He stood there in the quiet of his cidery, the scent of fermenting pears hanging in the air. He looked at his old, struggling equipment, at the dream that was still just out of reach. The distant war was over. They had made their move. The only path left was the final, direct confrontation, a confrontation where he would be forced to lay down his final, devastating card, the threat of taking their home. The stage was set for the final act. The final meeting was Ethan's idea. Sarah, his lawyer, had advised him that the next logical step was to file the lien and begin the cold, impersonal legal process of foreclosure. But Ethan knew he needed to close this chapter face to face. It was not for them, it was for him. He needed to stand in that living room, not as the dutiful son, but as a man in his own right, and speak the truth of what had been broken. He had Sarah arrange one last meeting at his parents' home. He arrived at precisely 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. He was not the same man who had left this house in a cold fury months ago. He was calm, his posture was confident, and he carried a single, slim manila folder. The prodigal son had returned, not to beg, but to collect. They were waiting for him, a united front of angry defiance. His mother, his father, and Leo were all seated in the living room, the same room where the crisis had begun. They had clearly prepared, their expressions a mixture of self-righteous anger and contempt. They were expecting a negotiation, a final emotional plea they could dismantle. "Well, look who it is," Leo sneered from the armchair. "Decided to come crawling back, did you?" "We are not going to be bullied, Ethan," his mother said, her voice sharp. "We spoke to our lawyer. That little piece of paper you tricked us into signing won't hold up in any court." Ethan didn't engage with their attacks. He walked to the coffee table and placed his folder on its polished surface. He looked at each of them, his gaze steady and clear. "I'm not here to argue," he said, his voice so calm it was unnerving. "I'm here for a final accounting." He opened the folder and placed a copy of the signed, notarized promissory note on the table in front of them. "This is not a piece of paper," he began. "This is a legal contract. A year ago, to solve a problem that you created," he glanced at Leo, "I gave this family $25,000. It was my entire savings. It was the future of my business. It was my dream." He looked at his parents. "In return for that sacrifice, you signed this document. You promised to repay the loan, and you secured that promise with this house. For a year, you have not only refused to honor that contract, you have acted as if it never existed." "It was a family crisis," his father blustered, his face turning red. "You're our son. It was your duty." "And now you're threatening your own parents, trying to make us homeless," his mother cried, the tears appearing right on cue. "What kind of monster have you become?" The old accusations, the familiar levers of guilt and duty, no longer had any effect. He was immune. He let their storm of emotion break against the wall of his quiet, unshakable truth. When their tirade finally sputtered out into a fuming silence, he delivered his ultimatum. "Here are your 2 options," he said, his voice like ice. "They are the only 2 options. Option 1, my lawyer has drawn up a 5-year repayment plan. It's all here." He slid a second document from the folder. "You will sign it today, in front of the notary I have waiting in my truck outside, and you will begin making payments on the 1st of next month. The agreement is non-negotiable." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Option 2, he said, his voice dropping to a low, final tone. is that I will walk out of this house, call my lawyer, and instruct her to file the lien and begin foreclosure proceedings immediately. The case is ironclad, and you will lose. You will lose the house, you will be responsible for all legal fees, and your credit will be ruined for a decade." He stood back. "The choice is yours. You have 5 minutes to decide." The room was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. He watched them. He saw the fury in their eyes war with the cold, terrified realization that this was not a bluff. The emotional power they had held over him his entire life was gone, and in its place was a simple, brutal business transaction. They looked at each other, a silent, frantic conversation passing between them. They were trapped, not by his cruelty, but by the consequences of their own actions. Finally, defeated, his father reached for a pen. He wouldn't look at Ethan as he signed the repayment agreement, his signature a ragged, angry scrawl. His mother followed, her hand shaking with a silent, impotent rage. Leo, his face a mask of pure hatred, stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Ethan took his copy of the signed and notarized agreement. He looked at his parents, at the two people who had been the architects of his silent burden, and he felt not triumph, but a kind of sad, quiet finality. "Goodbye," he said. He walked out the front door, into the bright afternoon sun, and did not look back. The Brotherhood was over. The family, as he had known it, was a ghost. Epilogue. 1 year later. The cidery at Orchard End was humming. It was the sound of a dream, finally, fully realized. In the center of the newly expanded barn, the gleaming stainless steel pressing and bottling line ran with a smooth, efficient rhythm, filling dozens of green glass bottles with the crisp, golden cider that had just won a gold medal at the State Agricultural Fair. A year had passed. The monthly payments from his parents had arrived on the first of every month, a cold electronic transfer that was the only communication he'd had with them. Ethan had combined that money with a small business loan and had finally bought the equipment that had been the subject of his dreams. His business was thriving. The Brotherhood was gone, but in its place, a cold, clean, and legal peace existed. He had lost a family, but he had gained himself. He was labeling a case of his newest creation, a dry, sparkling cider he had named the Promissory, when Chloe and Mr. Harris walked in, carrying a celebratory pizza. "To the gold medal winner," Chloe cheered, raising an imaginary glass. Mr. Harris looked around the new facility, at the humming machinery and the pallets of neatly stacked cases, a look of deep paternal pride in his eyes. "You did it, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You built it right." Ethan looked at his two friends, at their warm, genuine smiles. He looked at the business he had built and then saved and then built again, stronger than before. He picked up one of the freshly labeled bottles, the glass cool and solid in his hand. The liquid inside was clear and bright. He was at peace, he was successful, and he was, finally and completely, free.